Hello you lovely lot and welcome to another video. My name's Katie and we are gonna unbox and create with the July 2022 scroller box. So let's get started, shall we? Of course, every month we get a artist print and this featured artist is Christina Kwan, and I think it's open to interpretation as what that is. I see a bird, but going with the prompt of the box, which is in bloom, it also could be a flower. Let me know what you see in that print. Now let's get on to the actual goodies inside. Obviously we get the Scroller magazine with hints and tips on how to use the supplies, people who have won the Scroller challenge, as well as a bit extra from the featured artist. To begin with, we have a Marabou Graphics fine liner set of 4. And these come with 4 different tips. Obviously, we have a brush tip, we have an 0.8mm, a 0.4mm, a 0.2mm. And personally, I do enjoy a nice liner pen. We also have some magic colour acrylic ink, and they come in 4 colours. We have Lunar White, Gamma Green, Process Yellow, and Process Magenta. And they are really runny and really juicy, that's all I can say. We have a Major Brushes brand brush, and that is in a size 6. And our surface to work on is the custom A5 Scroller Box acrylic paper pad. That's 240 GSM, and we've got a good 8 sheets to go at there. We also have a sweet inside the box, which I haven't tried yet, but I have seen mentions of how incredibly sour it is, so I think I might need to sit down whilst I eat that one. As I mentioned earlier, the prompt for this month's Scroller challenge is in bloom. And for some reason I'd got it into my head to draw a picture of a stag with some sort of flowers or floral arrangement draped across its antlers, as well as a few nice ones around its neck, and I tried to go for a bit of a wild rose theme with those flowers, but as you might know if you've been here a while, botanical drawings are something I'm trying to improve on, so you know, we'll just say they've got a certain style to them, hey? I'd penciled this out off screen, and I know there wasn't a pencil included in the box, but you know what, you don't get a glass of water either, so I think some things you can probably already have in the house to crack on with. I did the outlining in stages using these lovely pens we had. I also did a check as well, and once they'd been left to stand for a while, there was very minimal activation when I went over it in some water, so it shouldn't be an issue with combining it with that paint. I must admit, I did have a few reservations about using these fine pens on the acrylic paper that we provided. The paper itself has a very slight canvas texture to it, obviously without it being canvas. And from personal experience of using liner pens over a textured paper like that, I do tend to find it can distort what you're trying to draw there. However, with this combination of supplies, the paper, although it did have that texture, it wasn't too prominent, and it really helped that these liner pens were really juicy. It's kind of weird to describe, but the ink just sort of flowed out of them. I didn't feel like I needed to put any pressure down to make any marks, and that's difficult for me. It really did pretty much just glide over everything, and yeah, there might have been 1 or 2 bumps in the paper that might have just distorted the line ever so slightly, but nothing compared to what I've experienced in the past. Having a variety of nibs was also really beneficial too, as I started the outline with the 0.8 pen. I wanted to at least try and get a bit of an Art Nouveau theme going on here, or Nouveau style rather, and just having that thick outline, and then the details inside can be added with the finer ones, which is what I'm doing right now. I changed over to the 0.4 nib for the vine details and the eye details and just a few other features there. And then I added the fur details with the finest one that we've got there, and I thought that was really effective for getting some textures down there. I also used that finest pen to draw the inside of the roses as well. I thought this would be a good opportunity to add not only texture but just a little bit of depth into this. There was only so much I could do before it sort of got a little bit too busy, so I think I left it at quite a good level there, and I adjusted the size of my line marks for the fur for the areas where it was a little less fur dense. And you know me, I do quite like doing a liner drawing with these types of pens, so as you can imagine I got a little bit carried away here before the actual paint was involved. One thing I will note about these pens, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just an observation I made, is the actual ink didn't quite seem as deep a black as what you would get with the Faber-Castells or the Micron liners, for example. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if you were using them in combination with other liner pens like those mentioned, you will see a difference, but just using it on one piece and having that little set there together, it does keep it nice and consistent, and it's not really an issue. Like I say, it's just more of an observation I made. And whilst I'm talking about comparing them to other liners, again, the ink flow out of them is fantastic. I just wasn't really expecting that. I was kind of just expecting what I normally have. And as well, another thing that made me happy about that was the ink dried pretty quickly, so I didn't have any smudging. They were lovely. I actually quite like these liner pens. I might have to research them, but saying that, I have got quite a lot of liner pens and I should probably use those up first. And here's a question for you. If I did do quite a lot of line drawings like this, would you think they would be good for colouring, for example? Would you perhaps, I don't know, be interested in colouring them in? Is that a direction you'd perhaps like me to make? And would you be interested in that? Let me know down below, because I'm sort of thinking in the future now. I've got a lot of pictures and things behind me, and I need to start doing something a little bit more proactive with my art, especially since you lovely lot tune in to watch. I feel like perhaps making some of these things a little bit more available to you guys rather than just being on a video format might be a nice direction to take things. So I'm just at the finishing touches on adding those details in. I wanted to add some details on the leaves, again just to add some texture and some contrast to the very flat looking antlers, if that makes any sense. And of course now it's time to try the paint, and I'm not a big fan of acrylic paint, however I do quite enjoy using the acrylic inks that are available. They do have a nice watercolour quality to them, but obviously with them being acrylic based, there isn't any danger of lifting any colours off inadvertently when you're applying different colours or different tones over the top there, which I quite like. It has its benefits. I was also quite pleasantly surprised by how relatively consistent it remained when I diluted it with some water. I didn't throw loads of water in there, but just enough to make it not dry so quickly and just make it, I guess, a tone that I'd like, a little bit like you would using the transparencies of watercolours there. So these are kind of nice and versatile. Another thing I'm actually really happy with is the paintbrush that I got in there. I can't describe it. It's like I'd use it in the ink, for example, and that's something I would expect to heavily stain the paintbrush. And obviously it is a white paintbrush, the actual fibres are white. And pretty much every time I went to clean my brush in my glass, more or less all of the paint came off. It left minimum staining, and I don't know if that's down to the inks. I'll have to try this brush with other mediums, but that really surprised me. I was sort of expecting it to remain the same colour as the first colour I dipped it in. I also really love how much it retained the paint that I'd lifted there. I was really surprised. I do a lot of watercolours, I do a lot of paint mediums, and it's actually nice to have a paintbrush that I don't have to constantly keep dipping back in and having to keep dipping into more colours, and then you get less on the palette, and I don't know, it felt like a quality of life improving kind of paintbrush. So I might have to look into some of these and perhaps see if I can get hold of other sizes. It would actually be really nice if Scrawlerbox did provide some links to websites where we could get some of these materials from. The colours themselves were actually really nice and easy to mix as well. If I could use one word to describe this box, it would be juicy. That's all I can say, because they didn't dry quickly in the palette. They dried quickly on the paper, but in the palette they stayed wet and they were still really nice and easy to mix. I managed to mix a really nice spring green colour there, and I managed to get a couple of variants as well, so I could add a little bit of depth. I also managed to mix up a relatively decent brown colour for this stag's fur, and I just added a base layer there, and then added a slightly warmer version of this brown by including that magenta colour we had. And again, that just was great for adding tone. And because these acrylic inks dry pretty quickly, it meant I could just go straight in there and there was no unnecessary colour bleed. Now, I know we did get quite a limited palette. I wouldn't say restrictive, but I would definitely say limited. The green we had was actually a pretty good green to work with though. It leaned more on a bluey green, which could be a little bit forgiving for mixing these brown tones up. The white that we had as well, it was fairly opaque. I'm not saying it was 100%, but if you went over a dark area and you knew that an area had been covered in that pigment. I found it super useful for mixing a very light creamy yellow colour for the antlers, because that's just the colour I wanted to do them. And it was really refreshing actually to have a white based ink, and I'm going to say it's more of an ink than a paint really, I suppose, but it was nice to have this white based ink where the actual colour pigment inside just didn't keep settling to the bottle and causing all the colours to split. It remained fairly consistent in the palette, which is great because you don't want to have to keep remixing everything up. You just want to dip your brush in there and then carry on, and because it's such a good brush for holding the pigments, you're going to be leaving that palette mixture to stand for longer, and normally that would separate, but it didn't. I feel like I'm waffling here, but I actually really enjoyed this box, and I even enjoyed the paper, and I would say that would be my least favourite out there, but it's still really good. Again, it's just down to the set texture on the page. I'm not a lover of canvas for that very reason. When I do use acrylics or oils, personally I don't like that texture coming through, especially when I'm trying to blend something to look really smooth, but you can see all the little indentations from the woven fabric texture there. It's just a preference of mine. Do any of you lot sort of agree with that? Are you a smooth paper person only, or do you like a bit of texture? And obviously I like a bit of texture for watercolour paper because that enhances any granulating, but for what I would describe as quite a smooth medium like this, I don't know, I don't want it to misbehave, but saying that though, it didn't. It behaved perfectly. I can't grumble, I really can't. This box was fab. For the background, I thought adding that green in there would be just perfect. It would make everything else pop, and I did dilute it a little bit because I wanted to have those overlapping marks in the background. Again, perhaps just to add a bit of a painterly texture there. I was beginning to think that the roses perhaps didn't quite have as much oomph to them, so I decided to mix up a very, very light a very subtle lighter version of the magenta we got there, again just to try and add a little bit of light reflecting on them and just make them pop out a little bit more. I quickly just gave some of the areas an additional outline where that white had touched over and blocked it out a bit, and pretty much done with it. As I mentioned before, I loved this box. It was a really nice, well put together box. It was a fun project. The medium as well was really fun to work with. Drop a comment down below if you had this box and enjoyed the materials, or if you just enjoyed watching. There should be some videos on screen now if you want to keep that art fix going. And in the meantime, I'll see you lovely lots soon. Bye!